This is Correct Anime Takes, Episode 2, recorded on January 21, 2024. Welcome one and all to Correct Anime Takes, the show where we talk about anime news, shows new and old, and of course our own opinions, which are the correct ones.
Yes, we only speak correct.
My name is Rosie McDamsel, and I am joined by the incredible Noth.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm okay. I just had spaghetti, and so did you.
Yeah, that's true. But now everyone knows that we had spaghetti, so it's good stuff. So what I wanted to do with the show before is to have like a news bar at the beginning. I'm not really sure what sort of news is good to cover for the show, other than just like, hey, here's this particular thing that we're really interested in, and that we would have a lot to say about. I haven't really seen any news like that. Nothing that we would have anything valuable to add to. So
it's mostly just been like, here's the dub cast for this show. This anime has a new key art that's coming out in a year or some shit, and I'm like,
These aren't like all the lead up to like a new anime coming out is not something I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah.
Like once we have like a trailer, or if I already know the source material, that's when I'll be like, ooh, thing. And if it's like a dub cast, like I don't watch dubs for new shows. I have no reason to.
Yeah. Those always feel those feel less like news and more like press releases, and I have no interest in reading a press release to you. You can do that yourself.
Yeah, like if you're interested in that, then cool. It's just that we don't really have anything to say about it.
Yes.
So what I'd like to do instead is to just have little sections, and if there happens to be news that week that we want to talk about, then it can be one of the sections.
Yeah.
But this time around, we are just gonna go straight into the current anime season.
Yeah.
All right. So, do you want to lead us off with any particular show?
Obviously, there's one show I'm obsessing about, but I kind of want to work up to that.
All right. Well, then I guess I can start us off.
Yeah.
Delicious and Dungeon Meshi. Delicious and Meshi.
So, I knew a lot of people, you included, who really liked the manga, and now that the anime is out, holy shit, the hype is real. It's good. it's really good. Poor Marcel.
Yeah. Marcel being bullied is fun. For now.
Ominous.
Yeah. I quite like these early episodes. There were a lot of fans that I talked to that were kind of doomsaying about this thing, like, oh, it's not that good. Like, either, Trigger didn't do a good job or whatever, or the voice acting, and I'm like, I do remember seeing the trailer for it, where they revealed the voice actors and being like, oh, I don't know about this. This isn't what I expected them to sound like, but that's normal. That happens with any adaptation, I think. I think it's very rare that, someone will be cast and you'll be like, oh, yes, absolutely. But a very short way into episode 1, I was kind of sold on it. I was like, yeah, this works. This is Dungeon Meshi, all right. And I quite enjoy it, and I'm quite enjoying the adaptation. It's a good way to revisit those earlier stories in the manga. Should we explain what Dungeon Meshi is for anyone who does not know?
Yeah, I feel like it's a good idea to go over, the premises of these shows. I mean, God knows, the official, synopses on LiveChart and stuff are awful, so...
So Dungeon Meshi, Delicious in Dungeon, is the story of 4 idiots who eat monsters in a dungeon.
Yeah.
More specifically, this dungeon appeared near a town, and everyone's trying to get to the bottom of the dungeon because there'll be a big treasure. And the adventure party of the main character, Laios, they get wiped, is a thing. Like, death is not a huge thing in his setting because you can just go and get revived, like in an RPG. It's not otherwise an RPG setting. The problem is his sister gets eaten by a dragon, and you can't revive someone without the body. So most of the party ends up quitting, and it's just him and 2 others, Marcel the elf and Chilchuk, who was the lockpick guy, the trap guy.
The rogue.
Yeah, the rogue. Thank you. and they go back into the dungeon because they have to get Laios' sister Phelan back before she gets digested by the dragon. And dragons have slow metabolism, so they'll be good for a while, but there's still like some urgency to it. So to avoid having to like go back into town and get all this perishable food and like deal with all that, they decide to just eat monsters in the dungeon. Well, Laios decides to do this, and then they meet their fourth member, Senshi, who is already something of an expert at cooking monsters in a dungeon. Now, I'm not really a fan of like the gourmet genre because I'm not a foodie. I just don't care that much. But
Yeah.
in Dungeon Meshi, it's less about like, oh, look at all this delicious food because it's all fictional food, and it's more a good way to explain like how these monsters work. It's just a really interesting setting that's really fleshed out.
And it's also really fun to see the characters bounce off of each other. Like, the only other kind of, like, cooking show I have ever been interested in is the Fate one, just because I'm like, I kind of want to see these characters just have a nice time instead of going through a Fate story, which is generally, not a nice thing to be put through. But this is really nice. And the characters are a lot of fun. I really like the I'm pretty sure he's a halfling, right? The rogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like him because he seems to be like the most functioning member of this group. Like, you've got the dwarf guy who's already kind of crazy because he just eats all these monsters.
Yeah.
You got the main character Laios. Am I
Yeah.
getting his name right? Who is also just absolutely down for eating monsters, and you got Marcille, who you get the distinct impression even before they start eating monsters that she's got like a screw or two loose in her head, and then there's just this guy who is just like, can we get the dungeon crawl going? We need to like function and survive.
Yeah, I like stories where you have just this kind of perfect storm of characters where it's like Laios is kind of the main guy because he's the party leader, like he's the reason they're going to do all this, but he's not necessarily like the relatable one. Like Marcille might be more relatable because as a normal real life person you might be like, oh, I wouldn't want to eat all this crap,
Mm-hmm.
but then it ends up being delicious, and it's just you gotta change your mindset. One thing that I can imagine some viewers might be worried about if they're not familiar with the source material is the sense of urgency, because you are trying to save this one person, and there are plenty of stories within anime and with outside of anime where you run into the problem of you can't have a lot happen on the way because everything always feels like it should be dropped to save this person if it's a time limited thing. Like, I don't know, Sword Art Online, the frickin' Alfheim arc. Like, you don't want to care about Kirito having elf adventures. He's got to save his wife. And I think Dungeon Meshi does a good job by explaining, like, okay, there's this indeterminate amount of time before, Phelan would actually be in trouble. So you can kind of play a little fast and loose. It's just that it's just urgent enough that they can't, like, go through things the normal way.
Yeah.
And also, having read the source material, I know, like, okay, they're gonna get there eventually, and that's not gonna be the end of the story, or not even the end of the interesting part. It's gonna keep going, regardless of, what happens, which I won't spoil. So I'm really looking forward to this. I wonder how much they will adapt, because the opening implies that they're gonna get pretty far. Like, we're seeing a lot of characters who won't be introduced for quite a while yet.
So I've got like very little exposure to the source material.
Yeah.
One thing I find really interesting about this, though, is when I heard Trigger was going to do it, I had seen, like, panels and pages here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But when I heard Trigger was going to do it, I thought immediately, like, that feels like an odd mix. And this is all leading up to, like, a very big compliment, I guess, in that watching this, it does not feel like a Trigger show. And I mean that as a compliment, not that Trigger shows are bad. It's more like, when you think of Studio Trigger, you probably go either right to Kill la Kill or Gurren Lagann, which look way different from Dungeon Meshi. So I mean this is a compliment to, like, oh man, these guys, like, can hit a lot of different kind of tones and styles. Bravo to Like, bravo to the animators. They are not one-trick ponies.
Well, when people think of Trigger, they're usually thinking of specifically Imaishi's direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't. It's kind of unfair to call Trigger a one-trick pony in that way.
Yeah, I don't mean necessarily that they are like one-trick ponies, but like you said, when you think of Trigger, you tend to think of that person's direction, which is
Yeah.
crazy. It's insane in a good way.
I-
So
I'm hoping that Trigger will be able to kind of shake that reputation, so that it's not just going to be like, oh look, it's the new Trigger show.
yeah, they're branching out and doing a really good job at it. Like it looked like what I would have expected a dungeon meshy show to look like.
All right.
We got more to say about that, or are we moving on to the next one?
I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay.
So how about Tales of Wedding Rings?
Such complex feelings
Really?
towards this.
My comments were going to be fairly simple.
You go first then.
Well, last time I said, like, I love the manga, the animation and trailer doesn't look good, and indeed that is what I got. I got an adaptation of the manga, which I like. The animation's not very good.
Yeah. I'm trying to parse how I feel about Sato, the main character. In the time since I have read the first volume, and it's really good. I like it a lot. And it's hard to describe the way he looks in the manga. In the manga, he has all of the usual visual character traits of just vanilla McNothing protagonists. But somehow there's just enough of a tweak to it that he looks really distinct and he can look really cool in the manga when he's doing cool things. And I'm not so sure those little tweaks, that little extra bit, translates into the anime.
I'm gonna reserve judgment on that for now.
Yeah.
But it is true that, Sato is just, kind of bordering on that generic thing. And, not to, I'm gonna pull my chivalry card for the week here. But, in Chivalry of a Failed Knight, if you look at the design of Iki in the light novels, he often does look kind of generic, and then when he's really cool, he looks really cool. And the anime design had to come up with just kind of one way to draw him, because that's what you have to do for animation. So they give him the poofier hair that he gets when he's doing cool stuff in the novel, and just always give him that.
Yeah.
And maybe here they kind of aired on the more generic side with the character design.
Because I think one thing about his character design I always remember is if I'm remembering it correctly, I hope I am, in the manga he's very broad-shouldered, more than you normally see, and he's built.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that translated as well into the anime. This is also one of those things where I think we only saw the first episode, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We gotta catch up. There's
we
too
gotta
much
catch
anime.
up on so much. I think with the anime, this is going to be one of those things where the good hook of what it's about doesn't immediately come right away, which kind of saddens me, because I think this is going to be one that will gradually build up an audience as people just check it out and get to the hook.
Yeah. And I think that's a good time to talk about what this is about, which is it's about this guy Sato, and he's just your average Japanese kid, and as a child, he saw a princess and her guardian come through a portal from another world. And now, in the present day, the princess has to go back because she has to go get married. Sato ends up going after her, and it turns out that there's this whole thing in the other world where there's a guy called the Ring King, and he has to marry all these princesses and get their rings that have magical power so they can be the big hero that defeats, the Dark Lord. And instead of the guy that the princess was supposed to marry, we just call her Hime, because that's the name she went by. She went by Himeno in the human world, and now Sato just calls her Hime. She ends up giving Sato the ring and kissing him instead. So now he is the Ring King, and he has to go around marrying all these princesses. And it could be kind of a, oh, here's gonna be some harem show with some dumbass who doesn't have a sex drive. It's a hard sell, I think, for the more experienced anime watcher, but
yeah,
the manga is a lot more interesting, and like it hits a lot of these, you know, tried and true tropes, these story beats, but the characters feel real enough. Like when they're like, oh no, we can't, you know, do the nasty yet, it feels fairly realistic in why they would feel that way, and
Yeah,
why it's
like
weird that they're thrust into this
mhm.
situation.
I think the key thing that Tales of Wedding Rings does is it doesn't just play Hime's like feelings about the whole like, you know, there's going to be other wives for comedy, which any other harem probably would be like, oh, look at the shenanigans, oh.
Hmm.
And here they like Sato and Hime both very clearly have like complicated feelings about the whole arrangement.
Yeah.
And the bit where, you know, they're in a bedroom together, which I think is probably going to get covered in episode 2. They're just sitting in a bedroom together because they are, you know, they're married. They should share a bed.
Yeah.
And so they're like, maybe we should do it. And eventually Sato decides no, because he's like, the first time should be perfect. And they're still just like kind of beating around the bush of just, oh yeah, it just sort of happened, huh? We're not into each other. And instead of just like the usual cliche, I'm not liking that person, it feels a little bit more like pained the way they do it.
Yeah.
So there's just like a lot more emotional. I was gonna say depth.
Gravitas.
Yeah, I was gonna say depth, but I'm coming to hate that word because it's been abused.
Eh.
So I feel like there's a lot more gravitas paid towards everything in Tales of Wedding Rings, and I think the people who stick with it and are willing to kind of play ball will come out maybe really enjoying it if they can get past the so-so animation, because it
Yeah.
is really so-so.
Yeah, the kind of problem that you run into is like you need to see how a story like this is going to handle having multiple love interests that are all supposed to be kind of equal to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you are going to have the problem of like, okay, girl number one, in this case Hime, is obviously going to have feelings about like having to share her guy.
Yeah.
Um, these are going to be understandable feelings, and you're like, okay, so how is the show going to handle this? Is it going to end up being just like, oh, it's a bunch of jokes, and this girl's thing is that she's going to be jealous? Is it going to be, oh, there is an OTP and no one else matters? And you can't rush through that, so that's why I think this is going to be like a slow burn for people watching only the anime.
I think
Um,
this will kind of go, unfortunately, the route of chivalry.
or like it's going to be underappreciated forever.
Maybe not forever, where it will, people will watch it and they'll like it, but it kind of looks like a bunch of other generic, not great crap. So the more discerning viewers will skip it at first, but just gradually some word of mouth will build up, and you know it will be one of those shows where, you know, if you search it on Twitter like years after that, like 2 years after the fact, people are gonna be like, "Holy shit! I just watched this and it's great."
Hmm. Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
At any rate, like the manga is like close to finishing, and you can fairly easily pick that up. So I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot of word of mouth just quickly from like manga fans saying like, okay, well, hang on though. You might not be convinced, but stick with it. That's what I'm hoping is going to happen, especially because the manga is just, you know, you can just go into Barnes and Noble and buy that. It's not like Chivalry of a Failed Knight where you have to like wait ages for dodgy fan translations.
Ugh. Yeah, it's also a fairly brisk read too. Like, to
Mhm.
give some perspective, I read volume 1, and I read volume 1 I think after I had seen the first episode,
Yeah.
and episode 1 is half of volume 1. So they're maintaining a good pace, like both in the anime and the manga, because, you know, I look at the manga and the fifth bride doesn't show up until volume 5, just going off the covers, and I'm thinking to myself before, you know, I read the first volume, are they even gonna get to that? Because she's all over like the anime promotional material, and now I'm like, oh yeah, they're gonna get to that. They'll get a good ways in, hopefully.
Yeah, it's the manga like really like it's pretty big on just the the art stuff, just the character art,
Mm-hmm.
much less the fighting. And what I'd hoped is that the anime would like, you know, kind of equalize that. But then the trailer came out and it's just like, okay, this is just gonna look kind of ass.
Yeah.
um And maybe we'll get some good lewd Sakuga. There was like a brief hint of that in the first episode, where it's just like, oh, someone wanted to like, do this shot of Hime doing something with her mouth.
Hmm.
That sounds way dirtier than it actually is. She's just picking rice off Sato's face and eating it. So hopefully we're gonna get like something that it can commit to, even if the animation team isn't maybe equipped for giving this its due.
Hmm.
Any last points on that, or?
No, I think we could move on.
All right.
Which, if we're going off of the list, I think we are. You're gonna have a lot to say about this next show.
Danger's in My Heart season 2. I love the first season. I love this too. I love that it feels like a continuation, like they're just continuing the episode count and everything. So, it is sort of weird coming back to it, and like immediately we're in this storyline that's like, I don't want to say like hornier, because this show isn't horny, but like more just like, oh, there's more like, slightly lewd shenanigans of like, oh, I gotta take a bath in the girl's house, and then, oh no, my underwear's gone. What am I gonna do?
I think it'd be fair to call it maybe not lewd, but still like sexual tension between the two of them.
Yeah.
Because you can cut that tension with a dull butter knife.
Yeah, and it's I'm not saying that wasn't in season 1. It was definitely there. There's definitely a sexual element, and like this, the awkward teenage sexual element specifically of like figuring this crap out. And that continues here as well. Like they really put a fine point on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more shenanigansy, which is a slightly weird way to start the season, I think, compared to the stories we saw in season 1 that were a bit more grounded.
Yeah, I haven't even seen season 1, so I'm just diving in because I was in the room when Rosie started watching it.
Yeah.
But it's a very fun show between like a moody boy who I don't know like the backstory to his moodiness, but it doesn't feel how do I want to put it? It doesn't feel like it's overplayed moodiness, or it's like cliche, I want to say. It feels like, like a genuine character, like this is a realized person, and not just, I wanted to write moody.
Yeah, his whole thing is, he's the sort who pushes people away so he can't be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a big part of his arc in season 1, was like coming to that realization, having to admit that, not only to himself, but also to his love interest, Yamada. And how do I put this? The premise can be a little tough, because the way that that Kyotaro, the main character, expresses his whole like edginess, his the way he wants to push people away, is that he deliberately like takes a book about like true crime or whatever to school to read, and he has a knife with him, and he's just telling himself like, one day I'm gonna go to school and I'm just gonna stab the fuck out of everyone. It's like, immediately making him hard to root for. But that's what he's trying to do, unbeknownst to himself. He's trying to push you away, the viewer. But within a few episodes, it's pretty clear that this is all a facade, and that he's actually really helpful to his classmates. When he sees someone in distress, he immediately like jumps in to help. It's just that he doesn't want to make himself vulnerable.
He strikes me as a very good boy who's convinced he's a very bad boy.
Yeah, like there's an episode early on where he like he doesn't have the knife with him at school because of reasons, and it makes him really uncomfortable, because it's kind of like his like, it makes him feel safe to have it, not because he's gonna be attacked, but because that's kind of like his like thing he holds on to.
It's a safety knife.
Yeah, I guess. It's really hard to explain, but like you just watch a few episodes and you start to understand what this guy's about.
And it's a very charming show.
Mm-hmm.
The two leads have great chemistry, and the girl isn't like just a waifu either. She's equally fully realized.
Yeah.
like there's a great scene. I don't think it's in the first episode of season 2, but it's in one of the ones we watched, where we get a bit about how I think like she quit everything because she was like afraid or no, it's like she quit everything because people who joined after her kept like getting better than her at it, right?
Yeah.
And the boy has to encourage her to just be like, I like that you do this thing and I hope you keep doing it, which is the push she needs to keep doing, what is it, modeling, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good thing where they're both like supportive and it's not just waifu trying to pull a sad boy out of his funk.
Yeah. There's some good like reversal of like the expected gender roles. Because, like, first of all, you just got, like, the boy is the really short one, the girl is the really tall one. And they really play with, like, the things you'd expect in, like, a typical, like, straight shoujo manga. That sort of romance. To the point that in the show, Yamada gives Kyotaro, like, she lends him a shoujo manga. He ends up getting really into it. And there ends up being like a parallel where like he's doing the things that the female lead in the shoujo manga is doing and saying. And he even like has this thing where he like sort of hallucinates the guy from the manga and he like shows up to give him advice. It's really funny.
It's great.
Check it out.
Yeah, recommended.
Yeah,
it's not normally a show I would like. So the fact that I think it is as good as it is a really good compliment.
And I could ramble on about it more, but you should really just watch it. It's good.
Yeah.
Speaking of season 2, is Banished from the Heroes Party is back.
What a fucking glow up!
Yeah, like
holy
what?
shit!
What did they just get like a budget upgrade? What happened here?
I don't know. We got to look into it. I wonder if it was like a different studio or a different director or something. But it's immediately so much prettier than season 1, and I think they're aiming for this to be the gay season, going off of that intro.
It could be. I don't know about the source material, so I don't have the power of spoilers on this
as
one.
As far as I know, they don't end up at like the sister and her friend don't end up as official as the main characters. There are too many characters whose names start with R in this, so I've got to like actually look it up so I don't mix them up.
Yeah, you've got Red, you've got Rid, and you've got Ruti. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can never keep track of them. So hang on, I'm pulling it up. Okay, this is what always fucks me up. The main character is named Red. His love interest, who he like, they start the season and going on a quest to find like gemstones to make into a ring for him to propose. That is how like official they are. So Red is has his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is named Rit. And what always screws me up is Rit has red in her outfit, like predominantly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you son of a bitch. And then there's Ruti.
Yeah. So I looked it up. It's the same studio and the same director. So I think they just got some kind of like boost on the budget, which is unexpected, but definitely not unwelcome. The first season was kind of ugly, and it was really the story that like kept it going for me, because I'm not into the slow life stuff, but this does a really good job of just explaining like this is why this world sucks to like do the thing that you're supposed to do in, because you get these god ordained powers. And it's just like, okay, this is just your job for the rest of your life now. And it'll, like, influence your personality and everything. And it's really very horrifying. And Red, he, the scheming dude in the hero's party, like, wanted to get rid of Red, who was the hero's brother. And he kind of just took the opportunity to be like, yeah, you're right. I guess I'm not necessary, and I'm not needed here. And he leaves to go like live a slow life as an apothecary. But his sister, the hero, like her whole backstory is horrifying, because as the hero, she has to do the hero thing. She has to fight the demon lord, and as part of her power, like she's never hungry and never sleepy, so she can't even have, just the basic
fulfillment.
fulfillment
Yeah,
of being able to sleep or eat
she
and
can't
enjoy
turn
it.
it off.
Yeah.
It never turns off. And I suppose, okay, so I know at the end of the last season,
Mm-hmm.
the guy who got Red kicked out of the party, enunciating it that way because it's also me making sure I'm saying the right name.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who gets Red kicked out of the party, he dies, yeah?
Well, he's defeated, shall we say?
Okay. Um, Rudy gets unheroed, and then Red and Rit consummate the relationship, and that's where we are now.
Yeah.
And I think we talked a lot about the premise in our last episode too, because
Yeah.
this was one of the shows we were excited for.
Mm-hmm.
And this season starts with us meeting potentially another hero who is way more just like, I'm the hero, the guys I kill are bad, and I'm not going to give that any more thought. Who is, obviously probably going to be on a collision course with Rudy. Rudy is just, it seems like this season's focusing on Rudy now because she just wants to, like, enjoy her life with her brother,
Yeah.
with her, future sister-in-law. She has her one assassin friend that, man, the opening really makes it seem like it's about those two. And I would love if the show got gay as hell with them.
I feel like that might kind of happen because season 1 was spent, like figuring out Red and Rit, and then Ruti shows up partway through, and they kind of save her from these forces that are trying to like make her do this thing she doesn't want, and now she's free, at least for the time being, and she can get way more development than Red and Rit can. Like, Red and Rit's quest right now is Red wants to make a really fucking cool engagement ring. So he's off on a quest to find materials for it. Like,
and
not particularly high stakes for him.
What amuses me too is this is specifically an engagement ring, and if you've never been through this process, the wedding ring is an entirely separate thing from the engagement ring, which just makes me wonder, Jesus Christ, man, what are you gonna do when you have to actually put the wedding ring together?
I think most people know the difference between an engagement and wedding ring.
I mean, I don't know. We are making this for anime fans.
Well, all right, okay. Anyway, I am quite curious to see what's going to happen next.
Yeah, me
you
too.
mentioned that other hero, and what really strikes me is like Ruti she looks like a light novel heroine, which makes sense. This is indeed a modern light novel.
Mm-hmm.
This other kid looks like he's from Dragon Quest or something, or like Wataru, one of those like freaking 80s fantasy like anime. And I feel like that's probably a very intentional design decision, and I'm very curious to see how that's going to be used to like deconstruct the usual fantasy stuff once again.
I'm normally not like a big fan of deconstructing the hero archetype because a lot of times when it pops up in light novels and their adaptations, it really feels like just the author lashing out at cool, charismatic people. And just be like, they're not really cool. Like, underneath it, they're actually assholes, and I'm the nice guy. If only people would see it. This one, I think, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm not even going to be all that mad if it does just go with the route of just like, like, hey, if I make the hero like this, they're really a horrifying killing machine. Because they did it well enough with Rudy and had enough sympathy for her that if they want to go in the other direction, I feel like, okay, yeah, you can get away with it. Like, you've done enough. Can we talk about, I'm still building up to the show I really want to talk about, so can we jump ahead to Metallic Rouge before I just completely lose my shit?
Sure. What do you got to say about Metallic Rouge?
Okay, so Metallic Rouge is an original work by Studio Bones. I kinda like it. It's like a future sci-fi, maybe dystopia thing. It's taking place on Mars. And it is about a girl named Rouge who is a robot, and she is hunting down these other robots. Like, it's a list of, 9 or so? And it gave me quite large Kamen Rider - Metal Heroes vibes. Because when the fight scenes happen, they shift into, like, these armored forms and do, like, all kinds of crazy nonsense. It's a very big vibes anime. I like it a lot. It was cool to watch. It was, I don't want to say chill. I felt chill watching it and just kind of taking it all in. and I'm really curious to see where it goes.
Yeah, it's very like front loading the vibes, so it's actually kind of hard to explain like okay, what's going on in this story because you're kind of left in the dark right now of like, who are these different factions,
What are the
who's
stakes?
yeah, who's working for who, why are they fighting really beyond just the immediate things that you get in the episode. Um like it really like just like raises a whole lot of questions and it trusts on the vibes to make you go like I want to know what they're talking about
Which,
because it's very easy to like set up a bunch of questions and if someone just go like oh well yeah, I have no idea what's going on in this and I don't care.
yeah, like it's a big gamble, and I think it works for this show
Mm-hmm.
because the vibes are good enough. There are like some bits that just naturally make me be like, eh. But that's really nitpicky stuff. Like there's a bit where two characters are talking, and it's basically like Organization 13, which we are a part of. It's like there's only the only reason it is phrased like that is so that term gets put in the audience's head. And I'm like, that's
Yeah,
not like an organic conversation.
I can forgive it.
Yeah, I do like it needles at me just
Mm-hmm.
a tiny bit, and even here, I kind of forgive it because the guy doing that is a theatrical douchebag. So he kind of would grandstand like that. You get
Yeah.
the feeling. So yeah, interesting, weird, vibey show. I wanted to put my money where my mouth was since last episode. I did so much bitching about like adaptations, and looking at our list,
Mm-hmm.
all of these shows we've talked about that we really like are adaptations. And
Yeah. Well, most things are adaptations.
yeah, and speaking of adaptations, should we get to the other
I
show?
wasn't quite done yet.
Oh, really? No.
Yeah.
Then go. What's your next
Um.
show?
No, I was still talking about Metallic Rouge.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um. There's you got a lot of the cyberpunky like aesthetics and vibes going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to think like that might get overused. Like it probably is kind of overused in recent times, but like I didn't feel at all like oh this is such a cliche or whatever. And combining that with the tokusatsu element that you mentioned, it really makes me think of a very specific thing, which is Bubblegum Crisis, specifically Tokyo 2040.
Yeah.
Uh, and that was a show I watched when it was fairly recent. Like I was just getting into anime, and I watched Bubblegum Crisis, Tokyo 2040, and so it's really interesting to see a show like that again.
Yeah.
So that makes me kind of hyped.
All right.
But you have a big one. You have a
Okay.
big one you want to talk about.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to. Okay. So there's a full lengthy title. I don't give a shit about it because most of the title is clickbait. The real title, as far as I'm concerned, is Seventh Time Loop, which this show came out of fucking nowhere for us and wowed the hell out of us, and I have not been able to like go more than a couple days without thinking about it. So Seventh Time Loop, I think like the extended title is something along the lines of the villainess enjoys a carefree life married to her mortal enemy or something.
Yeah.
She's not a villainess. Like at all.
That is SEO bullshit. That is just putting the word villainous in there because that's popular right now.
Yeah, like she's a villainess in that as far as the people around her are aware, the prince dumped her for committing crimes which are very quickly established to have just been a fucking lie.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's not like, I don't play Otome games and I don't read a lot of shoujo stuff, but that strikes me as like, wouldn't that just be a protagonist?
Yeah.
Like, doesn't that seem like a place a protagonist would start off at? It is a time loop because it establishes very quickly she, after getting dumped by the prince, got kicked out by her family who were like, oh, you were only good to us to be married off to the prince. Get out. And she gets picked up by a merchant group. She learns how to do, like, merchant stuff, starts her own business. It's going great. Then a war breaks out and she dies 5 years after the prince dumps her. And then she immediately snaps back to being in the throne room being dumped by the prince.
Mm-hmm.
And progressively goes through these different lives. And in each life, a war breaks out and she gets killed. In her sixth life, she decided to, pretend to be a man and become a knight. At which point, she, war breaks out and she dies. But this time, she is killed by the man who starts this starts this war. The Emperor of, I can't remember the name of the country, but I do remember their names. Our protagonist is named Riche, and the Emperor is named Arnold Hine. And then the seventh loop starts, and she's just like, okay, yeah, we're still doing this. I'm kind of tired of all of this, so I think I'll just take it easy this time. And she decides, you know what I've never done? I've never exited the palace by leaping off the balcony. And I want to do that this time. And as she goes to do that, she turns a corner and runs into the Emperor who killed her at the end of her last life and is responsible for all her deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just like, Emperor Arnold Hine! And he's just like, I'm not the Emperor. Who are you? What's going on? Because at this point, he's still a prince. And he's immediately kind of like curious about this girl as Riche, stumbles over explaining what her deal is. Then eventually is just like, okay, I gotta go, bye. And he turns and watches her jump off of the balcony and is immediately like, whoa. Whoa. And so she goes to, make her plans to, go start her new life, to grab her stuff before she gets, locked out of her family's mansion. And the prince shows up because the prince dumped her, and she's like, yeah, great, I'm out, bye. And the prince is like, but I had a whole speech planned! And he just showed up at her house to give the speech, to discredit her. And she's just like, okay, look, you're just in my fucking way. And then the emperor, the future emperor, shows up and is immediately like, I've fallen in love with you, marry me. And she agrees for, her own reasons. I think I've explained enough. You should talk about the show too.
Right. So the villainous trend has speed run the course of anime trends, because we're already on this setup, but what if this happened instead? So you've the whole thing of this, princess or whatever gets betrayed by her fiance. We've seen a whole bunch of shows like that come up recently. And this one just immediately turns it around of who cares about that guy? He sucks. And the show takes great pleasure in just having everyone think this guy's a complete chump, because he is. I call him Prince Fuckboy.
Even his dad shows up to be like, what the fuck were you doing, Riche? I'm so sorry for my dumbass son. But at that point, future emperor has proposed to her, and he's just like, well, that guy out, that empire, beats our country in terms of weight class.
Yeah. But the weird thing is, it doesn't feel like it's just some nerd, who only reads light novels going yeah, well, if I did this, I would put a twist on it. It just feels like a normal romance setup, and then, to sell books, they added the villainess wants a slow life kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
But it actually just feels like a normal story. In fact, it feels a lot like just an actual romance story for girls that isn't I feel like a lot of romances oriented at girls are not to my taste, and I like this because you've got, your bad boy. You've got this guy who in other timelines is a murderous bastard, but he isn't one yet here. And I think that makes the whole, the bad boy, maybe I can fix him kind of thing, a lot more palatable. And also our lead, Riche, isn't interested in him romantically as of yet. That'll happen, obviously.
She is absolutely, getting into him, though.
Yeah, but the end of episode 2, she's already oh.
Yeah, there's...
She mostly just, wants to make use of him so that she can have that leisurely life she wanted. She's I'll agree to this marriage on these conditions. And she, sets things up so that she can interface with some of the people from her previous lives. That'll come into play later, I'm sure. But also she's just I wanna not do anything. I wanna be really lazy. And also, I don't want to be anywhere near the Emperor. And the guy's all right.
Yeah, sure. Great, cool.
But of course, she ends up helping people anyway. And when she gets to, the place where she has to live, and they're oh, we're sorry, the preparations haven't been finished. And she's oh, well, I like doing maid stuff, because she was a maid before.
Yeah.
And she's no, I'll live here and just clean it myself. It'll be great.
This is one thing.
So she's not that lazy.
Yeah, well, this is one thing I really like about the whole, time loop thing. There's a lot of other, oh, they've been reincarnated before. It's just an excuse for them to be stupid, powerful, and boring.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it's kind of given Riche this wisdom and also skills that come into play, like picking locks, which comes up hilariously.
Yeah.
There's obviously the sword play, like when future Emperor Arnold Hine goes to propose to her, the way he does it is he sneaks up behind her and swings his sword at her, having picked up, oh, just by looking at her, I can tell she kind of knows how to handle herself. And she grabs somebody else's sword to parry the strike, and he's just like, okay, I am definitely into you. Please marry me.
And then later, when they're in the carriage going to like his kingdom or whatever, and she takes a nap, and then she once again she like snaps awake, and she's like, "I told you not to put a hand on me," because that was another one of her conditions. And it turns out that in her sleep, she took his sword, and he was trying to get it back. That is so funny. That is so funny.
Yeah. I think like the key here is the two leads. Riche, we've talked about. She's great. She's a go-getter. She's also got some wisdom. And I think the other thing too is Arnold being, he's like the mysterious bad boy, and we know within 5 years he will start a war that will engulf the continent and get a lot of people killed, but we don't know why. She very pointedly does not know what makes him into that person. So there is like the big question of like, what is going on with him?
Yeah.
That I think makes it work, other than just, oh, I'm a mysterious, broody bad boy with no aim. We know what he will eventually do, which I think kind of like elevates him a little bit above just, a bad boy.
Yeah.
And that cold open in the first episode, like, this show is, this show is not aimed at me, a cis white 95% straight male. But holy shit, does this show make Arnold cool? Like, Jesus Christ.
That opening goes so hard in how it's directed.
It's the hallway scene from Rogue One, and Arnold is Darth Vader.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's really like incredible, and I was so confused when you put the show on, what is happening here right now? So that also shows, the people making the anime have faith in this. Like, they're not just like, oh, I'm doing this for a way too small paycheck, whatever, I don't care. They clearly do.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of it is just Riche is admirable as a lead. She's someone you want to root for. And I think in both, the light novel reincarnation BS genre and the, romance for women genre, it's really easy to get a lead who sucks. At least I think so. And a lot of these, I drop dead of overwork or whatever, or I'm a shut-in loser and I go to an isekai world and then I don't want to have to do anything. I find it really hard to relate to a lot of those characters. It's like, okay, yeah, you were in a shitty situation, that sucks, but I don't know you, and you are not displaying anything that makes me go like, oh, you're someone that I'm interested in. You're someone I want to, root for. Because it's just supposed to be this generic thing of hey, are you a loser who feels sorry for themselves? You could put yourself into this story. I don't find that interesting. And in a lot of romance for women, I come across the issue of the lead character is bland and vapid because you're supposed to be able to project onto that person and be like, oh, well, I could romance the bad boy. And I'm just like, I don't care. I want an actual story with characters in it. And this Seventh Time Loop is doing that. Holy fuck.
Yeah, So I talked about how, it was, how it's the two leads that really pull you into this, because we haven't really met a lot of other characters yet in the 2 episodes we've watched. But I think one thing I also really enjoy is, I am making this assumption based on what I've heard, and a lot of, female targeted romance stuff with a bad boy, doesn't he kind of tend to steamroll her a little bit?
Yeah, but
there is this really good kind of power play back and forth between the two of them, where, she sets her, requirements, and he's just like, yep, absolutely. But he's also, he'll sneak into, her quarters and hide behind her just to, observe her. And it never, actually feels creepy, because she's also on to him a little bit. And at the end of episode 2, he actually does touch her in violation of their agreement, and it's such a good moment. You're pretty much not even thinking about it until
Yeah.
as he's walking away, he's like, "Think of something you want. This time I actually did break my promise."
Yeah.
And that's such a good moment. And that's also the bit where, because she is as soon as he leaves, she basically swoons.
Yeah.
And it is equal parts like, that's the guy who killed me, holy shit, and also what she does not realize yet, she's thinking, holy shit, he's hot.
Yeah, like, it's got to be wild to like get courted by a guy who unknowingly murdered you in another timeline. Like, it's very understandable that she'd have this condition of like, do not touch me ever. But then when it does happen, I don't think she's even immediately thinking about like the fact that, oh, he's violating the agreement that we had.
Because in that scene, he's also validating what she's felt through like X many, like, what is it? So this is her 7th time loop. She's been through 6. 30 years of time loopery.
Yeah.
And that's probably a very powerful moment for her.
Yeah.
It's a powerful moment for the show. I think, I've already mentioned how, this is not a show targeted at me, but one thing I think really will help this, like, break out of, its targeted demographic is, holy shit, Riche is so cute. Like, in the opening, she's dancing about in multiple costumes, and it really feels almost like playing it like, look, guys, she's cute. And I'm like, I'm a guy, it's working. Like, she's the lead, and I don't like to call her a waifu feels almost a little dismissive.
Yeah.
Even though, you and I both call, multiple really great characters waifus.
Yeah.
But they give her just enough kind of, waifu-isms without diluting, the rest of her character that I'm just like, oh my god, she's adorable. And Arnold is cool, so, I'm just interested in all of this.
Yeah, I think, I hope some younger viewers get into this show.
Yes! It's
because
in, the top 10.
This is the sort of thing that, I wanted for a really long time. That, when I was really little, I might see a show and kind of, just project what I want onto it, because you come in the middle of a show, and you might not see every episode, and you might not really understand what's going on, but that's what you're thinking. Oh, this rules because it's like that, and it's actually just kind of your own imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And this show might actually fulfill that.
Yeah, I would have eaten this up when I was younger. I'm eating it up now.
I think younger viewers deserve a show like this.
Yeah. Oh,
that's what I think.
So good.
They're not even anything more on this?
They're not even together yet, and it already feels like so much of a better, more fulfilling relationship than in most of anime, where it's just like, I like them, sort of, but I'll never admit it to myself or them, and we'll just tread water for fucking ever. I am very, very curious about Arnold's deal. I've seen people immediately speculate he's also been going through loops. I don't think if the show has confirmed that either way, or even hinted that even in the novels. It'll be a hell of a twist if he is. But one thing I noticed I can't remember if it was the opening or the ending sequences, which are, by the way, fucking beautiful. They worked on those. Go check them out. It's either the opening or the ending, but it shows Arnold and Riche younger than they are when they, air quotes, meet in the 7th loop, which I have seen some people speculate, maybe they actually met when they were younger, or maybe it's just, kind of metaphorical. But the thing that gets me is Arnold very noticeably has bandages wrapped around his wrists and his ankles, and also his head at one point, which just makes me wonder, what's up with that? Why would a boy be wrapped up in bandages? We know he's an uber badass with the sword now.
Yeah.
But we have no idea about his past.
It's a mystery.
So curious. I need more. All right. Yeah, that's the show that's just been its claws are in my brain hard.
Yeah. And I think actually this wasn't on the list to talk about, but I think we should compare to the other villainous shows of this season, because it makes this look even better.
Oh my god.
Villainess Level 99. I may be the hidden boss, but I'm not the Demon Lord. This show blows.
It does. It's so bad. It does this parody thing. The first half is a fake parody of a quote-unquote, traditional kind of like shoujo otome thing where, you know, this bland girl goes to the academy, runs into like the three smartest and hottest guys immediately. She's got the special power, which is why she's there as a commoner. It gets like a, you know, fake intro sequence that is not animated. It's like a fucking PowerPoint. And I like, you know, I have seen people be like, well, at least it commits to the bit. And I'm like, but it's so obviously a bit, and it's such an uninteresting bit.
Yeah, they don't go nearly over the top enough for it to work as a joke. And if it's supposed to be like, you know, they go in so hard to make it like one of those like fake out things of like, oh, this is actually a different show. And it's like, I know what show I'm watching. I clicked on it on the freaking site, or I'm watching it in Japan on TV because I looked at the TV guide, you know? I'm not gonna be like, it's not like Pop Team Epic starting up and you're just like, wait, what the hell? Did I click on the right thing? Because it's so jarring at the beginning where it pretends to be an idol show or whatever. And then just, you know, frickin' Popuko just like tears through the screen physically and is like, ha ha!
Gotcha, bitch!
And like the joke is supposed to be that this Otome game's really vapid, but then the main character who gets reincarnated as the villainess or the hidden boss or whatever was still playing it, even though she's like talking about how fucking lame it is.
And hey, pro tip to writers: if you're gonna write a series like this where somebody gets reincarnated into a game world, you should probably not right off the bat have them be like, "Oh no, this game's dog shit," like, because it's probably a searing indictment of what you're going to write in that world.
Like, obviously, like, you know, Otome games can have this mix of, like, the visual novel, dating sim stuff, and, like, you know, more traditional RPG elements. But this fictional game seems to be in this place where, like, the Otome part is, like, complete dog shit, but also the RPG stuff is so cool that this woman wants to, like, grind it out like crazy and, like, you know, learns it inside out, and there's a freaking hidden boss like it's a goddamn Toho game or something.
It really, all of these, you know, so-called Otome games with art, like Otome game animes, where it's just like, oh, this Otome game also has RPG mechanics or fucking mechs. Feels like they're either written by people who do not give a shit.
Well, if it's mechs, it's just Sakura Wars. That's a real game.
Well, it feels like they're written by people who actually have no interest in Otome games. Like, I don't know who, you know, level 99 Villainess. I don't know who their writer is. You know, I don't know if it's man or a woman. Maybe if it is a woman, they're just like, you know, writing because the Otome game stuff is popular, but really they spent most of their time playing Dragon Quest. I believe that. And I would love to see, like, you know, a kind of quote-unquote reincarnated in a Dragon Quest, but through a female player's lens. That would be kind of interesting. This ain't it. This feels like it's, you know, split halfway and not interesting in any dimension.
And because the actual main character doesn't show up until, like, halfway through the episode because they spent so long doing a stupid fake-out that doesn't make sense, we don't get any understanding of, like, who this character is beyond just like, okay, I got reincarnated as this character and I know that she's the hidden boss and she's going to get absolutely destroyed if the timeline goes like the way it does in the game. So I'm going to avoid that, you know, that classic thing. And then she, like, inadvertently ends up grinding herself up to level 99, so when they have to do the fucking sorting hat thing at the school, it's like, oh my god, she's level 99, and now instead of, you know, fading into the background and not having any trouble, everyone will think she's trouble, but they don't explain why in the first episode. I didn't watch the second episode because it's dog shit, but I read about it, and apparently the thing is like, oh, everyone's already gonna be really prejudiced against her because she has black hair and dark magic, I guess. And then now that she is level 99, immediately everyone's gonna mistrust her and hate her. That doesn't come up at all in the first episode. You don't think that's important fucking information?
It's
like, it's apparently, like, so bad that even her own parents basically just, like, got rid of her until they needed her to, like, go to the school and, like, marry someone.
We talked about in Metallic Rouge.
Yeah.
About how that show uses its vibes to keep you and make you want to watch another episode. And I think when you're telling a story, there's two things that you need, like, you need one or both of them to keep people, you know, in. And it's either really strong vibes or an emotional hook. This one has neither.
Yeah.
Like, I need to know, like, all right, so your vibes are non-existent. So give me the emotional reason why I should care about this person we will be following.
Yeah.
And they don't. Because most of, like, the half of the episode we do get with her is just her talking about, like, oh, I can go attack these monsters. They drop this thing. I go to sell it. I buy an experience up thing. I rinse and repeat. Then I go to the school. It's just like, holy shit! Who are you?
And the other thing, right, is like if you have the vibes or the emotional hook, you can also put some trust in the people making this that there's going to be a satisfactory answer. That if you don't know something, it's probably because they're going to explain it later, and it's a deliberate mystery. But here, it's like you've got this, you haven't got either of these things, and on top of that, it's like, okay, every anime might be someone's first, right? It might be the one that pulls them in. And then even if, compared to everything else, it's not very good, that'll be special to them. But nearly everyone who might come across the show is going to have seen an anime before, and they'll know that most light novels aren't good.
We would
So
hope
we
they'll
are
know
like
that.
already like rock bottom starting this out. We have no faith in the writing of this thing, and since there's nothing else to pull us in, if we don't get important information like why the fuck does it matter that she's level 99, my assumption is that it's because the writing is dog shit, not because it's a mystery that's going to be explained later.
Still not the worst show we've seen this season.
What is the worst one?
I would be inclined to say it's Magical Girls.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
There's one more Villainous show, guys.
What?
There's Dr. Elise. I watched this one on my own.
Ah, okay,
It's
yeah.
very bad. They try to make this about like, okay,
I
yeah?
think I stole your face.
Oh no. Give me my face back. It's mine.
There we go.
Don't worry, that happens when I talk about bad shows. So the idea in this one is, there was an actual evil princess, I guess, or at least her family was evil, so she got burned at the stake, and then she reincarnated in modern Japan, and decided, I'm gonna do better, and I'm gonna save people, so I'll become a doctor. So she does that, and then she dies in a plane crash, and then reincarnates back into her old life, but now she's not evil and, like, is a doctor, so she might be able to change things. This is told in a really stupid way, and the animation is just incredibly bad. Just like, there's a lot of shows that don't look particularly good. It's just, workmanlike, or there's like no budget, no time. It's just not going to look very good. This one has shit like, there's a book that looks like it's made out of jello because it like reverberates when she grabs it. There's a scene where like she like touches the floor with her bare foot, and her toes don't like actually like pop up like your actual toes would if you're like hitting the floor. It just kind of keeps the same foot shape, and I'm just like, oh my god, what is happening right now? This is not what a foot looks like, and this is a close up, and it's like, ah.
Is this the one with the fake horses?
No, that was level 99. The one with the shitty CGI horses. But, like, so, they spent most of this episode, like, having people talk her up, like, oh, you're the best doctor ever, and she's constantly telling all her patients, like, I'll definitely save you, which it's not something you should do, ever. And they're just going on like, oh my god, you saved my mom, and you're so great, and we barely get to see any of this. Like, the only time we see her, like, she goes into, like, the operating theater because some dude is bleeding out, and, like his spleen is bleeding, and his blood pressure's dropping. Oh no, we gotta save him now. And the surgeon freaks out, and then Dr. Elise comes in and just, like, calmly lectures him on what he should do, like, and I'm just like, I get that this is supposed to be one of those big moments, like, in a hospital show, but this is not the time to be teaching this guy. This is not a teachable moment. Someone's dying right now. And what happens is she gets on the plane because she has to go to another country to, like, perform a big surgery. And the plane goes down. But then she wakes up and she seems to be fine. And she helps, like, everyone else on the plane. And then at the very end, the twist is that she was actually bleeding from her abdomen the whole time, and then she like dies just as help finally arrives from outside. But it's directed in such an awful way that, she wakes up and I'm like, oh, well, she's got to be injured because I know what the premise is. She's going to die. But it just seems like she's perfectly fine. And I'm sure this works better in the novel because you can have this unreliable narrator in first person just like ignore the part where she's bleeding to death because that's not important. She has to save people. In the anime, you're faced with a challenge in trying to like convey that, but instead it just looks like she's perfectly fine until suddenly it's like, oh no, I'm dead.
Yeah.
It is so bad. And then at the end, it's like she wakes back up as the princess and she's like really emotional and she gets to see her family again. But outside of just a brief moment when she's being burned at the stake and she learns that her family is dead and she's sad, understandable, we don't know anything about this family. We can't feel anything of like, oh my god, she finally got to see them again. I didn't even know that that was something she secretly wanted. I thought she was just like, well, I've been giving this new life and now I can help people. And that seemed to be her big regret, is like, I wanted to help so many more people and now I'm dead. So it's just so bad. It's trying to get these emotions out of you and it doesn't earn it in the slightest. This blows.
So not having seen this is one of those cases where, like, I wonder if it's better in book form or if they had a more competent director willing to, like, put in the time and energy and probably the budget they don't have to make something of it.
I suspect it is better in book form just because some of these ideas will be a lot easier to do in a book where you don't have to cram everything into an episode of a specific length. Although, if I recall correctly, this did have an OP and an ED. It would have been really easy to not have those in the first episode, so you'd have more time to actually properly convey this thing instead of just having a bunch of people go like, oh my god, you're so great, you're such a good surgeon, oh my god. And actually, like, explain, like, the deal with their family. It's bad.
Yeah.
So, do we want to talk about gushing over magical girls, or?
Let's make it real quick.
All right.
Okay, this show sucks. It's bad. It's not good, and it has nothing to do with the fact the main characters are like, teenage girls being put in lewd situations. It's bad smut, it's bad writing, it's badly animated. It's
badly
just
voice acted
sucks. Too. Like, it's supposed to be, kinky BDSM-y smut. But, like, there's a bit where the main girl is, hitting the magical girls with a crop, and it's animated as if she is smacking a pool noodle into a brick wall. It's just not attractive or sexy. They go through this first, they go through a solid first story where, air quotes, solid, if this was written competently, where it's like she gets blackmailed by the evil mascot into being the evil magical girl who torments the good ones, and she has to be like, no, I love them, I don't want to do this. And then he's just like, well, I took a video of your sexy transformation sequence and I'll put it up online if you don't. So she does it, and then towards the end she's just like, why am I having these feelings of liking it? And, that could have been the first episode, except that's the halfway point, and they repeat it all a second time.
Yep.
And I have seen people be like, oh, yeah, like, it does, like, cool shonen stuff later. And I'm just like, no, this sucks. I'm not going to, like, I'm not even going to trust you that it gets better. It's just bad. It's not bad because it's smut. It's not bad because of, the age, like, the age of the characters. It's bad because it's bad.
Yeah. Let's
move on.
A Sign of Affection is cute.
Yeah.
It's about a deaf girl, and she, there's this kind of awkward but sweet guy, and they're gonna fall in love.
Yeah, I want to see more of it.
Yeah.
I don't
have too much to say about it, just that it's
cute.
Cute. It's really cute.
I have seen some people say, like, oh, hey, this guy actually crosses some boundaries that you would not in real life with a deaf person.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of necessary to make, like, an interesting, like, heart-fluttering romance.
I have the, hopefully not particularly rare ability to separate reality from fantasy, so I can simultaneously be like, yeah, these are not things you would do with a real deaf person. However, this show is cute and I like it, so, I'll look
Yeah.
past that, which is, basically
And
how you should with a lot of shows.
we have the POV of the deaf person
Yeah.
instead of, like comparing it to a silent voice. I like a silent voice, but there's definitely like this undertone of like um
Would you say objectification of her?
maybe kind of.
It's not like I would say it's like objectification, but not sexualization.
Yeah.
Because she's treated like something to be protected.
Yeah, and then there's the whole thing where like, it's kind of about the main character like redeeming himself, which he doesn't arguably like deserve. And that's kind of the point of a silent voice. It's supposed to be uncomfortable, but it does sometimes when it gets to the actual love story, that makes me uncomfortable because it's like it's kind of portraying this girl in a weird way.
Yeah. It kind of infantilizes her.
Yeah, that's the word.
Yes.
Yeah, and a sign of affection doesn't do that because we are in her head and we can see her perspective, and it doesn't feel like ham-fisted. It just feels pretty realistic in like how she sees the world around her and how the world interacts with her, and the things that bother her about it.
Yeah. I like it. Man, you just made me want to watch more now. Like already, because
Well,
I'm just like, it's cute. I need to see more. Speaking of, cute, though less, there's a lot less substance in this cuteness. Hokkaido Gals. This is a show that will live and die based on how well Silverlink animates the main girl's boobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a meet cute, but okay, so in real life, the whole alpha beta sigma thing is absolutely complete horse shit. It is not founded at all in science. However, I find terming things alpha and beta to be useful when it comes to fictional characters. It's nice shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is such a fucking beta, I don't believe he will ever get laid. Which, is a problem when you are running this show based on, like, the fantasy of being around, like, really cute girls. It's just like, oh, so he'll never do anything. I don't give a shit. If I want, like, if it's all about the cute girl, I can just look up the clips and the stills on, like, the internet.
Yeah.
But it's not even that bad, like, of a meet cute, but this guy is such a vacuum of, like, personality and charisma. It makes me question, like, what the hell does she see in him? Like, that, she couldn't have gotten from any other, like, no-name nunts in her town anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
like,
just both weirdly, like, fetishizing each other's exoticism in a way. I'm not saying that this is like horrible or making me uncomfortable. It's just really trashy.
Yeah, it's just there is not a lot going on.
And also just the weirdness of like she goes outside like half naked in the fucking snow. And I'm just like, look, I don't care if you're born and raised in Hokkaido, you're gonna get frostbite the same as anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one where, like, it's really just... I have this theory that for the people this show is aimed at,
yeah,
the fantasy isn't that you get to date a girl, it's that you can spend time with the girl. And I think it's that fantasy because I think the fantasy of actually dating a girl would break their suspension of disbelief. Like, because then they wouldn't be able to project upon, like, a person who is actually successfully dating somebody. Which is, not a flattering thing to say, but it's a theory I've had for a while now, and boy howdy is this show not doing anything to disprove it.
Just... Do you want to watch more of it?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that concludes our, like, initial impressions of a bunch of shows. There's obviously way more. There's at least one that everyone's talking about, and we just haven't gotten to it yet. So that'll be for next time. Do we want to go into our main topic now, or?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
All right.
I'm fired up.
All right. Let's freaking go then. Let me play a little jingle. All right, our main topic, Remakes. Who needs them?
Our main topic that will probably end up taking up less time than the first episodes, but who cares?
So, obviously, the reason that remakes are on people's minds is Netflix and Wit Studio are remaking One Piece, a show that is still running. Um, and this is, because the live action show did actually well, and for some reason they decided that they should turn it back into an anime. I don't really understand, but it's happening, and now everyone's talking about remakes and reboots and what have you. And I think it's a very interesting topic.
Yes, me too.
Why do remakes exist? And I think to analyze that, you gotta analyze, like, why do remakes exist in other media? Like in movies, for example.
Yeah.
Cinema started in, like the 1920s, you can really say?
Yep.
And
Or
obviously...
maybe even earlier.
Yeah, but I feel like that's when you start getting, like, movies.
Yeah, as
right?
much as I fucking detest it, The Birth of a Nation is the first of what we would call a, film narrative. God, I fucking hate it. Come on, mankind! But yeah, like, that's when,
Right.
what we think of as movies really started.
Yeah, and obviously there have been a lot of technological advances and a lot of cultural advances
Yeah.
in that time, or at least like cultural like evolution. Like advances sounds like everything is necessarily good, which it isn't always. So it makes sense that you would want to retell these stories for a different time using different technology because that's what we've always done as a species, is we always retell stories since the dawn of time. It makes sense. And with video games, which is a much younger medium, it also makes sense that you'd be like, oh, we can have more graphics now. We can have 3D. We can have all sorts of stuff.
I think, like, with video games, one of the go-to examples for, like, why you just, like, how do you justify a remake is looking at the leap from original Resident Evil or Resident Evil 2 to, like, the remake of Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Which changed up both, like, the gameplay. Obviously, the visuals were way better, but it also, like, tweaked other things along the way. So it is simultaneously kind of like a remake and also a new experience, which is generally like, a new experience is a good reason to remake something.
Yeah.
I thought when it came to remakes, I actually ended up thinking quite a bit about some Kamen Rider stuff.
Right.
I've been watching a lot of Kamen Rider for the past year. Kamen Rider Black actually got a remake on Amazon Prime, of all things, I think, called Black Sun, which is a way darker, way more kind of politically driven take on that story. It is wholly different. It keeps kind of the same general gist of it, where, you have Kotaro, who is Kamen Rider Black, who is forced into opposition with his, brother, Nobuhiko, who is Shadow Moon, and becomes involved with an organization called Gorgum. But it takes it in such a different direction. And I think, that's a good way to do a remake.
Yeah.
Just go put a new spin on it. And then the other justification, I think, is to reintroduce a thing to a new audience. And my two examples for there, and one of them you would have too, is the first one is Shin Kamen Rider, which, reintroduces kind of like original generation Kamen Rider, Takeshi Hongo and Hayato Ichimonji, for modern audiences to be like, look, this is why those guys are cool. And the other one is Urusei Yatsura, which got
You are getting so far ahead in my notes here.
Oh, want me to, like, tone it down?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can get to Urusei Yatsura. I'll tag out. You can talk a bit.
Yeah, like, you touched on, like, I talked about, like, you make remakes because of new technology, and you talked about, like, you can have a different perspective on a classic thing, where, people know what Kamen Rider is, but, a lot of people weren't around when the original series came out.
Yeah, and
so it does make sense to be like, all right, let's put this in a more modern context so you might experience those same feelings.
Yeah, and, like, modern Kamen Rider is really different from, like, the Showa era when that first series started.
Yeah. And I think the idea of, like, being like, you know the original, but we're deliberately going to do something else. That's kind of postmodern, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think when people just are like, oh, we should make a new version because the other one looks old, that's not necessarily a cool creative thing. Like if it's
Yeah.
like, oh, we couldn't achieve what we wanted before because of technological limitations, or maybe because of the times. Like, you know, you remake a horror film from the 30s, and there's tons of places you can go because you have way more technology, but also you weren't allowed to do anything that horrific on screen in the 30s. Um, but stories are retold all the time, so why do we have to cling to one as a definitive version? And that brings us to anime.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess remakes are considered like a more precious thing. Like you can't keep doing this like over and over as much as like you could like make a film adaptation of the same story so many times. Um so I think people are often like, okay, well, here's this show, and I want a remake of it because maybe it needs to be more faithful to the manga because that's
Yeah.
something people value. Or, oh, you know, it indeed just looks old, which I hate that because I think there are very few shows that have just like aged so badly that it's like, okay, do it again because it's too dated, you
Like,
know?
yeah, like, the original Mobile Suit Gundam
Mm-hmm.
it's got some dated animation, but the bits where they put the effort in are amazing. Like when Amuro fights Lala and they have the bits just zipping around everywhere and he
Yeah.
just is going to town like the Gundam is just like spazzing out in spaces, it's slashing away at a bunch of these. They did a really cool trick where they like, okay, well, here's what we do. We take frames out of the animation to make it look like they're moving that much faster. And that just looks good even though it's old. And the other thing is, like, oh, being more faithful. One thing I was thinking about when we first decided to talk about this was like the line between a remake and just a new adaptation.
Yeah.
And the one example that came to me that was Full Metal Alchemist.
Mm.
And it's like, I don't think you would even call Brotherhood a remake of the original anime. It covers some of the same ground initially, but then they end up going into different places.
Here's the thing, though.
Mm-hmm.
Brotherhood is very clearly aware that
Yeah.
its target audience is mostly people who saw the previous anime.
Mm-hmm.
So it speeds through that adaptation at breakneck speed and ends up being worse for it because a lot of the really memorable stuff is not there. You can't just simply watch Brotherhood and get that same feeling at that
Right.
point. So that does make it seem like, oh, it is remaking it for the express purpose of like, oh, but the anime went in a different direction and it's got to be more faithful to the manga because that's somehow more legitimate. Like people can't just read the freaking manga. No, they have to have an anime that is the manga.
Yeah.
And I will always think that Brotherhood, regardless of my own feelings on like the manga storyline or how Brotherhood is directed or anything else, it's always going to be a damaged adaptation because it knew, hey, 2003 wasn't that long ago. And you probably saw that one and you don't want to just watch the same thing again because it did those parts really well.
Mm-hmm.
And faithful doesn't always mean good.
Yeah.
You know, Sailor Moon Crystal is a remake of Sailor Moon, and it's a lot closer to the manga, and that doesn't work on screen. There's a reason that it was very different in the original anime, and heck, I'm fairly certain that, like, Sailor Moon was designed as a multimedia thing. Like, you'd have the manga, and then you'd also have the anime, and they're not the same on purpose. They're both playing to the strengths of their own medium. But Sailor Moon Crystal slavishly adapts the manga, and it just ends up being dry and cold and having none of the charm of Sailor Moon because of it.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, why is it so taboo to just say, read the manga? Maybe people don't want to read. Maybe it's harder to get. Maybe the source material really does just work good for a screen adaptation and they didn't do it right yet.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, because I mentioned that, line between remake and a new adaptation, is like I jotted notes down, and one of them was the One Piece anime versus the live action adaptation. But the one that matters to me, and this source material doesn't even have an anime, and it's the Wheel of Time.
Right.
That's a 14 book long series, and there are some beefy books, and it's 15 if you count the prequel. And I was just thinking, like, okay, obviously because those aren't even manga, probably less people would be willing to pick them up. Like, light novels sell less than manga does. But it's getting that live action adaptation on Amazon. But that is also diverging a lot from the source material. It's probably going to end up in mostly the same-ish places and cover the same thematic stuff. But there's already, like, really key, impactful moments from the books that will not happen based on the way the live action show has gone.
Right.
And I feel like, Wheel of Time would actually kind of work amazingly as an anime. And then it's like, okay, so why would you remake it in this format? And it's to like let those moments reach an audience they wouldn't have otherwise gotten to. And I say this even as I railed before against adaptations and just go get the source material. And I can't deny, personally, there are some things that I would want to see a remake of, just either for, a larger audience to get those moments, or to maybe kind of unify some disparate stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned Original Gundam and how that still looks good, but it's still kind of dated. You can watch, and I highly recommend it if you have the time, and it is a lot of time, to watch the Original Gundam, Zeta Gundam, Double Zeta Gundam, Char's Counterattack, and then finally Gundam Unicorn, which is the absolute cherry on top. It is the payoff to watching all of that. And part of me would be kind of thrilled if they remade Original Gundam up through Counterattack to kind of be unified in terms of animation and visuals with Unicorn. So you had this good, cohesive epic. But at the same time, I'm like, look, just watch the old stuff. It's really good.
Yeah.
So I kind of have to, watch myself and think like, okay, is that really necessary? Or is it just pandering? And
Yeah.
I can be pandered to. I'm not immune.
Yeah, I feel like the way that the Gundam franchise works is you can go a lot of places with it now. So I feel like the sort of people who would be interested in the old UC stuff they wouldn't have a problem watching it, even if you get clunky animation or weird pacing sometimes.
Yeah.
That's part of the charm. And instead, you make a new Gundam show to get those people in, and goodness knows which from Mercury really pulled some people in.
Yeah.
I don't personally like that show, but I recognize that it absolutely figured out some ways to get a whole bunch of people interested in Gundam. And maybe some subsection of those people are going to end up watching those old shows and being like, hey, this is great.
Yeah, it's happened. I watched somebody on a whim, watch G-Witch. And then, less than a week later, they were burning through all of OG Gundam. And the last I checked, they were, some 10 or so episodes into Zeta.
Yeah.
I think they're hooked.
But if you remake Original Gundam, I don't think you're going to get any new people who wouldn't already have appreciated the original. It would really just be pandering, like you said.
Yeah. Should we get to, Urusei Yatsura, then?
Yes.
So, Urusei Yatsura, I think I've kind of come off a little bit negative on remakes. I feel like that's kind of the vibe I'm giving. Urusei Yatsura, I think, works with its remake because it is not like a serialized narrative where it's all of these events happen and if you skip something it doesn't make sense, like say Gundam or even a theoretical Wheel of Time anime. Right. Urusei Yatsura is a comedy. We have watched a little bit of it. I don't know if they have done it at all, but it's not really a show that has two-parters. It's here's the episode, here's the plot, shenanigans ensue, you laugh. And I think because of that, it works as a remake because you kind of have to establish it for a modern audience. It had been, how many decades since the old show?
The first show started in, 81, I think?
Yeah. And now they just recently brought it back. And so you need to remake it. But then aside from, the initial inciting incidents and the episodes that introduce the cast, you can go in any direction you want and just do stories that had never been told with those characters before, because, the world we have now did not exist back then to, put those characters into.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you're right on that. Like a lot of serialized stuff, it's like you'd need some big hook to be like, okay, well, why watch this one over the old one, other than just, ew, it's old, you
Yeah.
know? Because I don't think that'll really, like, if someone's going, ew, it's old, they probably won't appreciate most stories like that, even if you do, like, just draw them again.
Yeah, with
Um,
like Urusei Yatsura, you couldn't just start with the new stuff because the new audience would have no idea, like, who the fuck are these people?
yeah, it makes sense to, like, have those introductory stories for all these characters, because, there's this big cast of all these, like, really funny characters you can use.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense to just kind of mix that. And I don't think, like, because they're jokes, and a lot of these jokes still work, I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, getting the old audience back, but being like, hey, remember this funny bit? Whereas with something that's more serialized, I think you run into the issue of, like, um, unless there was something, like, seriously wrong with the original, or you're specifically like, oh, well, this is more faithful to the manga, or we're going to specifically do this different thing, it kind of ends up being redundant. Like, I think the only time when you're just like, we're just gonna do a straight up remake, no BS, would be if the original adaptation was so bad
Mm-hmm.
that everyone would rather just see it gone and replaced with a different one.
Yeah.
And that's a fairly rare thing, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess that sort of happened with Fate Stay Night, but Unlimited Blade Works isn't really outright a replacement for the, because it's a different route
Yeah.
of the visual novel, and then they adapted another one, Heaven's Feel, into movies, and now the original route is just kind of like,
This old
I
weird
hope you like
amalgam.
playing the visual novel or watching this kind of crappy, clumsy anime,
Yeah, and even then,
which I still enjoy,
with
but I absolutely see the faults in it.
and with like Fate Stay Night, that's a story across all three
Mm-hmm.
routes, where I wouldn't mind a air quotes remake that is just, we are making an original route that pulls all of the threads together, because otherwise you are left unsatisfied with something that got set up in the prequel.
It would be an interesting thing, and it
Yeah.
wouldn't, like, disregard, like, the source material or the existence of different routes, because it'd just be like, yeah, that's one way to tell that story, here's another one.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people probably don't want to play the visual novel because it's freaking dense and it'll take you forever, and visual novels aren't for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to with the Wheel of Time, I would definitely appreciate, like, a straightforward adaptation, because I look at those books on the shelf and I'm like,
Jesus.
I'm not gonna read all that anytime soon.
Yeah, and like, God, I would love for it, because there is just some like absolutely hype moments,
Mhm.
like Rand pulling Kalendor out and like declaring himself the dragon at the end of
Yeah.
book 3. And then the big one that I wish people could experience is the end of book 10, where Rand, the main character, has his big, like, culminating character development epiphany on the mountaintop. And it is one of the most moving things I've ever read, but you need all of the books leading up to it, and that's a big ask for people. And I would love if there was, like, a show I could be like, watch this, because the moment he ends up on top of that mountain is going to make you cry.
Here's the thing, though. When it comes to manga being the source material, I can't really think of anything where it would be a huge ask of someone to read that in
Yeah.
absence of an anime adaptation that does everything just right.
Yeah, and like there are times where, I prefer the manga. Sometimes it's like because of the art, sometimes it's just because of like the way the anime kind of tells that story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of his reputation, but like Hiro Mashima's Eden's Zero, I vastly, vastly prefer the manga over the anime, because the anime looks perfectly fine, but those characters do not look nearly as good in the animation as they do in the manga, because Mashima is the one personally drawing them. Conversely, there are bits in, like, where I've read My Hero Academia, and I've just been like, man, I can't wait for that to be animated so I can understand what the hell is happening.
Yeah. I often when like an anime gets made and I like it and it's based on a manga and the manga goes on for way longer, but we're not going to get a season 2, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll read the manga. But you run into that whole issue of where do you start? Because if I just finish that anime and I just start reading the manga, it's very often going to feel kind of redundant because it's not a hugely different way to tell that story. I'm not going to get any like vastly different like looks into the same material here if I like read that right away. And that's why it's a bit confusing to me when someone's like, "Oh, this manga needs an anime adaptation." Like, unless you're specifically like, "All right, this freaking part would look so good animated," or like, "This would be really funny if delivered by the right voice actors," or something like that. Unless you have something specific like that, I don't entirely understand why you cannot, in fact, just read the manga if there's no anime or you don't like the anime.
Yeah, I find it really interesting we've been talking so much about adaptations in this discussion of remakes. Because, like I said, there's that line between, adaptation, or, like, a new adaptation and a remake.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think generally when you think remake, you tend to kind of consider it as being in the same medium. Whereas, an adaptation is like from one medium to another.
Yeah.
But remake is such a broad term. Like you could very easily argue that an adaptation is also a remake because it is just retelling a story that has already been told elsewhere.
Yeah. But the word remake is what people are always throwing about.
Yeah.
So that kind of reinforces my idea of like, is having just a manga somehow less legitimate? Is the anime always supposed to be the end game, the real work that people like this care about? Because that seems like a bit of a shame to be so reductive about manga.
And it's also really funny to consider how that kind of contrasts with auteur theory, which I don't buy.
Mm-hmm.
Like auteur theory, like everything is the culmination of like multiple people's works. Because typically like people will value the auteur and their unmodified vision, and the anime is somebody else is processing that vision. But because people are like, oh, this needs an anime, it's kind of saying like it's saying oh, it needs to get the anime so that this story can become legitimate in a way.
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with. Like a story is legitimate once it's told. Doesn't matter the medium.
Mm-hmm.
You should like an adaptation. If an adaptation should really just be a new avenue to appreciate this story. It's basically bonus points. If you like the story, an adaptation is basically bonus points for you. And there is always the chance, that an adaptation could elevate the source material.
Yeah.
And there is one particular anime I really want to like talk about, but I know you might want to like work up to that particular branch of the subject. So,
I don't know what you're talking about, so go right ahead.
I think there are certain anime that just should not be remade because you couldn't do it nearly as well today with kind of animation. And the first and foremost example of that is Lodos. Do not remake Lodos. Do not ask them to remake Lodos. I promise you, they will never make it look as beautiful as they did back then on hand-drawn animation. Digitally, it will never look as good. And by God, Deedlit deserves to be that beautiful as she is in the OVA.
Yeah, it's I get why people would say remake Lodos because like some books were never adapted. Some books were adapted weirdly. The TV series was
funky,
a complete goddamn mess. But the OVA is really good, and you're never gonna match it. I'm not sure it's possible in the medium of digital animation, but also, who the hell would you get to direct this? Who would you get to be the character designer? Who the hell can match that old stuff and have people go like, oh, well, it's different because this was made a long time later, but it's still really good. This can go toe-to-toe with this 30 plus years later.
Yeah.
If you have the answer, send it on a postcard. By which I mean, put it in a YouTube comment.
The only person I could possibly imagine that I'd want to see, do character designs for Lodos is Hidari, who has already done it. But I don't think, they
But
do art
Hidari's
that...
not an anime character
Yeah.
designer. You
And
can't animate Hidari art.
Yeah, and, it wouldn't translate well to animation. It's the way Lodos looks and the feel can't be replicated, I don't think. Like, it's lightning in a bottle. The TV series almost gets there, which sound like we sound kind of dismissive of the TV series, but we should clarify we really like it.
I like the TV series. I also acknowledge that the animation is horrible.
Yeah,
And that there are episodes where the
not great.
characters just don't look like themselves in the slightest.
Deedlet's randomly long face.
The pacing is just like taking it up the ass sometimes because they
Yeah.
have to just cram in a bunch of stuff to be like, hey, this guy exists. Just so you know.
Spark is a colossal dweeb until he isn't.
I don't.
Something weird
If someone
happened.
wants to step up and be like, I'm a director with brass balls, figuratively, and I'm going to work with this studio, and they're going to give me a whole bunch of time and money and animators who are well-fed and eager to do this, give it a shot, I suppose. I don't think anyone can do it.
We've canceled the Mushoku Tensei adaptation to do more Lodos.
Like, just because, you could do a more faithful adaptation doesn't mean you should. And, I saw someone posted this big-ass list somewhere in a forum post of, like, these are things we should have rebooted now that One Piece is being rebooted, or whatever that means. And I saw a show on there that had me go, why? Why would you do this? The original is perfect, and there's nothing wrong with it. And that is Cardcaptor Sakura.
Yeah.
That show is beautiful throughout, despite being long. Like, the only thing that's maybe kind of wrong with it is the last arc is kind of crap, but you can just kind of skip it. You just kind of skip it if you're not having it, or just have it on the background. And the only reason I can think of that someone would want to remake that is to make it closer to the manga.
By which they mean add in the creepy bit.
It's like Sailor Moon. There's a reason the anime is different from the manga. Like, it's not like Clamp, where you came in and we're just like, yeah, you can make a manga, you can make an anime over a manga, bye. No, they were still there being like, all right, it's really important that Sakura gets a new outfit every time. Because, I love this quote, by the way, or I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't know the exact quote, but it's like, it's really sad for a young girl to only have one outfit. And so they give her a new one every time, and even if she has, like, the same, like, big animation for doing her thing, they redraw it with the current outfit. It's so good. There's nothing wrong with Cardcaptor Sakura.
Yeah.
Don't remake it.
I haven't even seen all of it. We've only watched a little bit of it together. But immediately I was just like, oh yeah, I see why this was popular. It's good.
And they did like a sequel series like some years ago, and it was just kind of like, yup, you sure did Cardcaptor Sakura again. This was kind of unnecessary.
Yeah. Do you think there are any, justifiable remakes of anime?
I think there may come a time when it will make sense to do a new adaptation, rather, of Dragon Ball.
Right.
When you can just start fresh instead of having all of this baggage of like, oh, it's always going to be the same people involved.
Yeah.
The same voice actors, the same people at Toei, the same people. If you could just start fresh and adapt it completely originally, no Dragon Ball Kai re-edit BS, just completely original, new take on it. And then maybe even just take some, good ideas from all the hindsight you have, where you might be able to make the story tighter, maybe, improve some of the character stuff that you couldn't have seen coming before, because Toriyama is someone who writes everything as it happens.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair one, because it's also helped by the fact that there's not really a single good way to watch Dragon Ball. Like, you've got the original, like, I'm going to refer to mostly just Dragon Ball Z. You've got, like, the original series, which is long and drawn out because they had to put in, all of that, like, quote-unquote filler to give themselves time for more of the manga to come out. Then you've got Kai, which is compromised, I'd say.
Like Kai already just ignores the original like Dragon Ball as it is, and
Yeah.
just starts with Raditz shows up,
Hmm.
which is really dismissive of like a lot of material. Just to go
Yeah.
like, hey, this is the popular part, right? And then there's all the weird redraws. There's the soundtrack scandal.
Yeah.
There's just way too much crap there.
There's too much baggage to both the original Dragon Ball Z and also Kai.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that one is kind of, like that could be justified down the line, especially because, that cast is getting old.
Yeah, we've already got some of the main character actors have passed away,
Yeah.
and some of these actors are really getting up there in age, and they can't necessarily do the same performance they used to, and it's gonna be increasingly weird. And at a certain point, you kind of just gotta recast, and it's like I love those actors, but sometimes it's gonna get a little ridiculous.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of like, what is something I would like to see remade. And the thing that comes to my mind is Char's counterattack, in the sense that this is going to take some time. So Char's counterattack is actually an adaptation of a novel called High Streamer.
Hmm.
High Streamer, gets greenlit to become Char's counterattack the movie, and so it becomes Char's counterattack, but then Char's counterattack gets an alternate novelization, I think, if I'm remembering the pattern here, like the progress of these things, called Beltorchica's Children, which includes the character Beltorchica Irma from Zeta Gundam, who in that show was Amuro's girlfriend. Amuro is the protagonist. She is just not mentioned at all in Char's counterattack, and Amuro has a new girl, allegedly because the people at Sunrise thought he should have a new girl every time, like James Bond. But I would like to see
Amuro Ray, the James
famously
Bond of
ladies man.
That's sure is a take from the people at Sunrise.
Yeah. And when I say I would like to see a remake of Counterattack, I would I would like to see an adaptation of Beltorchica's Children, because there's enough that's different in there that I think it could be worthwhile. Like just, Beltorchica being in there and in a relationship with Amuro Ray, and the title comes from the fact that she is pregnant, and Amuro is aware of it. And, I think that would provide, like, enough different character and emotional stuff to kind of justify it. Mm-hmm. Plus, there is the factor of, like, wow, cool robot, and I'm like, oh, please, God, animate the High New Gundam one day. I want to see the High New Gundam so badly. That's, like, the one that always comes to mind for me, where I'm like, yeah, I would like to see that. And you could expand on it. Like, hell, maybe you don't even need to stick with the novel. I would love Camille to show up. Because, the moment he hears that Char is dropping rocks on the Earth, he's going to be like, I have an opinion on that, and I am damn well going to let Char know what that is. With violence.
One thing that I think is, like, potentially interesting is when you've got a story that's been adapted in a really specific style.
Yeah.
And, we have no idea what this One Piece remake is going to look like, but we do know that before the One Piece anime, there was an OVA it was a different studio, different staff, different voice actors, and it's a really interesting look at just, like, this weird alternate reality of One Piece anime.
That reminds me of the JoJo Part 3 OVA.
Ah, yes.
And I haven't watched all of it. In fact, the only bit I have watched is the OVA version of Jotaro versus Dio. And oh my God, it's so pretty. Like, the carnage is amazing. And there are bits of that I like even more than the show we got. But it kind of, like, sorry to interrupt. It kind of strays, like, it has to do things differently because they only had, X many OVA episodes.
Yeah.
Whereas Stardust Crusaders, the anime, can fully adapt the manga for good or ill.
I think a lot of people who have only seen, like, JoJo the TV series might be very surprised at how that OVA looks. And similarly, if you've watched the One Piece anime, there's all these really specific stylistic choices that if you watch that OVA, you're like, what's going on? Why does Luffy sound like that? Why do his attacks sound like this? Why is the animation doing this other thing? And that's far more interesting than just being like, oh, well, you know, we're gonna make the better version that's more like the manga of anything. Like, make it really different. Like, you know, we're finally getting like a new Monogatari anime, and I'm just like, you know what? I wouldn't be weirded out if they said we're remaking Bake Monogatari and it's a different studio. That would be fucking wild. It'd be interesting. I don't know if it'd be good, but it'd be interesting.
Yeah, like I would be interested in a, Monogatari remake, largely because I would be interested in seeing how that story plays out with an art style that does not give me a headache for prolonged exposure. Because, the Bake Monogatari is the way it is because Shaft did not have a lot of budget for it. It became an unexpected hit. And they keep up that art style, and it eventually just kind of becomes, artsy and wild for the sake of being artsy and wild, and it just gives me a fucking headache to look at. Kizu Monogatari is great, though. Like, if they're going to remake it and have it look like that, Jesus.
Yeah, man.
Wow.
I could go on and on. Like, City Hunter would be an interesting one to remake, honestly, if you just took a different approach and just,
From what I know of the manga, it, has like an actual kind of arc that it goes down, which the new movie might be getting at. And the anime just has none of that at all in favor of, episodic stuff, and the anime is really good. I wouldn't mind seeing, like, here is the story from the manga, which we might be getting.
And, them being concurrent meant that the anime introduces certain things, and then the author of the manga was like, oh, that's a cool thing. I'm going to do my own version of that. I'm going to have a dude from Ryo Saiba's past show up and do this whole thing. So I think if you just kind of, like, put the anime to one side and had someone just go like, all right, I'm going to take the manga and make an anime out of that, I think it could be a really interesting, different take on it. Especially because, like, a bunch of, like, stories from the manga were adapted, like, weirdly or not at all, and it'd just be an interesting way to look at this, because it is a long series, and it's not really easily available in English either, so... that ticks some boxes for, like, would this make sense to remake?
Yeah. Similarly, because, nowadays, if a manga gets an adaptation, like, 99% of the time, it is, like, done straight. It is, like, this is what's on the page, now on the screen. But back then, a lot of it was just like, okay, the manga is the basis, it's the skeletal structural framework, but we are maybe going to go in a different direction. And another show like that was really influential, Battle Angel Alita, which the manga, I have heard, plays out really differently from, like, the anime or the OVAs that were, how Alita kind of got popular. Like, I mean, hell, the manga, I don't know if Alita is because of the OVAs were called that, or if that was how they, like, brought it to America, but the original manga name, I think, is Gundam.
Yeah.
So, like, right out of the gate, there's that difference.
I'm pretty sure the name Alita comes from the manga's translation.
Okay.
Like, this was in the day where, like, people bringing manga over kind of got maybe a little big-headed about being like, oh yeah, we know what's up,
Yeah.
So all the names are different in the manga, and that's just carried over to everything else. Like, that's what's in the movie, and then the movie gets done in Japanese, and it's still using those names.
Yeah. and granted, like, in terms of, like, more Alita stuff, instead of remaking, like, the OVAs and the anime, I would really just settle for a second live-action movie, please God.
Yeah.
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of things where I'm like, yeah, remake that. There is, like, one show I'm thinking of where I'm just like, oh my God, you borked the adaptation of some of those books so badly, redo it. I don't want to say it, because it's extremely not safe for work. You will probably have a good idea of the show I'm talking about.
Yes.
Which is a shame, because, like, man, that is a series that really goes places that would blow people's minds. I don't know how they would make it outside of an OVA, but, maybe that's what it would take.
The thing you said, though, about, like, adaptations are so straight nowadays...
Yeah.
I would like to see more adaptations that are looser.
Yes.
Because we get so many things that just work less well as an anime, because it's literally just like, yeah, just fucking put the book onto the screen.
Yeah, how many of these light novels would work so much better if the director had the balls to be like, I'm just gonna go in a hard, different direction.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna, like, maybe have a story to tell here.
One of my favorite anime movies of all time is Perfect Blue, directed by Satoshi Kon, the late great. And it has almost fuck all to do with the book. It's just there's an idol and there's a stalker. And it's a horror thing. And eventually the novel got translated. It sucks. It's awful, and I'm glad that the movie just mostly jettisons that plot. It's really funny because the book reads more like a slasher movie.
It's funny too because that makes me think of an anime movie. Akira. Akira is based on a manga, and it only covers like half of the manga and comes up with its own ending. And some of the characters go in like way different directions or have entirely different like arcs and identities in the manga. But I'm just like, man, that movie is so good at just getting across what it needs to. I don't even know if I'd want the manga to be fully adapted.
They've been trying to remake Akira for years and it never happens, probably because the identity of the anime is way bigger than the manga could ever be.
And it also, like, I can't help but feel there's this undercurrent of like, oh, we need to make a live action movie so people will watch it because they consider an animated film lesser. And one thing I really want to do one day is I want to just sit my dad down and be like, we're going to watch Akira. And see how that goes. He'd probably fucking love the Cowboy Bebop Private Eyes movie and the Cowboy Bebop movie. But like, there's that stigma of like, oh, it's got to become live action so, we can openly talk about and like Akira. Because it's weird to like a cartoon.
Yeah. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
But that's a whole topic onto itself, I think.
Yeah.
So, do you have any last thoughts on remakes?
Perhaps, let me check like my own notes I had jotted down real quick. Do you have any?
Nope. I have said everything I want to say.
All right. I have one last thing, and it was actually in your notes, but we just didn't really get to it. I don't want stuff getting remade right now because I don't fucking trust the industry. Like, people are overworked and underpaid, and they couldn't really put their heart into it the way it deserved. So, it might be cool to one day see, some things, get remade or readapted, but I would prefer those people to, take more time to do it and earn more money.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding.
Yeah. It's the same with video games.
All right, I think we've talked about this pretty extensively.
Yeah, so...
I feel like we bounced a lot between, adaptation and remake, but I already touched on, like, why that line is just so weird and murky.
Yeah. I think we can turn it over to our listeners for any more opinions. Do you have any anime that you would want remade or not remade? Do you have any opinions on everything else we said about remakes? Or maybe about the shows that we looked at from this season?
Please shout at us and tell us we're wrong, because that counts as engagement.
Feel free to comment on this video if you're watching on YouTube. You can also reach us at Rosie McDamsel on Twitter and Blue Sky, Rosie McDamsel channel on YouTube if you're not finding this on YouTube. We're also on Twitch at Rosie Rosa. We may record podcast episodes live in the future, and the rest of the time we play games and talk about stuff. Yeah, that's everything I have to say, so just tell us everything. I want to know your opinions, and just... We'll see you next time, so hit that subscribe button, ring that bell if you're so inclined, etc. Bye-bye!
Bye, thanks for listening.